Hi, this is a little video, a quick review of World War II information for the NCTA course. Alright, so quick review, something you probably have learned already. Prior to World War II, Japan had a considerable amount of holdings. They were a huge colonial empire. They had taken land from China during the Sino-Japanese War. They had taken land from Russia during the Russo-Japanese War. They took land from Germany during World War I. So everything on this map that's in red or pink is part of the Japanese Empire. Alright, some dates to point out. This will give you a quick rundown of World War II. The first question is, when does World War II begin? Is it 1939 or 1937? When I teach my cultural studies classes, when we focus on Japan, we look at World War II from Japan's point of view. And for a large amount of Asia, World War II starts in 1937 with China and Japan fighting. From a Western point of view, it's usually 1939, with the War of 1937 to 1939 being classified as the Second Sino-Japanese War. Take your pick on how you teach it. For this course, I'm going to state that 1937 is actually the start of the war, and it happens at the Marco Polo Bridge. It's just kind of one of those crazy things. It involves a soldier who's missing, and a lot of, obviously, hatred and aggression just right there, boiling over, and it escalates very, very quickly. That's going to lead to all sorts of issues, and then the Nanking Massacre, which has caused all sorts of issues, whether or not it's recognized by the government of Japan. It is what it is. Alright, so 1937 through 1942, Japan is just ripping through Asia. They're just conquering. They're defeating indigenous armies. They're defeating colonial armies. It really doesn't matter. In 1940, we get the Tripartite Pact. There should be a reading document on that if you want a quick summary of what that was. But it does a few different things, including set up who the allies are in this particular war. If you attack one, you're at war with all of us. It's Italy, Nazi Germany, and Japan kind of also carving up the world. This belief that we're going to win, and let's be honest, by 1940 and 41, it kind of did look like they were going to win. So it set up clear boundaries of who gets what. 1941, December 7th, by the American calendar. There's about a day difference between America and Japan, so it's not the Japanese date. Japan invades Pearl Harbor. There should be a video explaining why that happened, at least from a Japanese point of view at the time. 1942, Japan's still expanding. They take some parts of Alaska, the Aleutian Islands. There's a few reasons why they did this. One of which was to kind of divert some ships from the Battle of Midway before that battle happened. Nimitz chose not to divert the ships and free the Aleutian Islands. Instead, he kept going. There's also this idea of, if we can take large parts of Alaska, we can run daily bombing runs on any part of Canada and America. 1943, 42, we also have the start of the island hopping campaign. The U.S. starts taking more and more islands, marching towards Japan. We see Japan losing lots of islands. We see the British starting to push back out of India into Burma, trying to get their land back, their colonial holdings back. The U.S. invades and takes Tinian, as well as the rest of the Marianas. This is a very important detail for World War II, because both atomic bombs, as well as the daily bombing runs on Japan, will leave from Tinian. It'll be the busiest air base in the entire Pacific, if memory serves. 1944, we see the first kamikaze attacks. That's going to be a huge shift in fighting style. One plane taking out an entire battleship. From a cost perspective, it's a very devastating tactic. 1945, we got Iwo Jima, recapture of Burma, Roosevelt dies. The invasion plan of Japan, the first draft gets approved. The Philippines gets recaptured. The premier of Japan releases a famous statement saying, if you invade Japan, we will fight to our last man. We will not surrender. You'll have to kill us all. We get the invasion of Okinawa. We get the first atomic bomb, Little Boys, dropped. We get the Soviets declaring war on Japan and taking Manchuria. We get Fat Man being dropped, and then Japan surrendered. Some noteworthy words to point out here. The emperor had actually wanted to end World War II before the atomic bombs, but he was more or less a figurehead. The military really didn't allow that to happen. The U.S. sends a couple of different plans for here's how we can end the war, here's how you surrender, here's what we want. And the first one was pretty harsh, and then after that, it's not as harsh. The idea was to try and entice the Japanese into signing this, to make the terms more favorable. Unfortunately, it backfired, and it sent the message of, hey, the U.S. wants to end this war. They don't have the stomach for it. They're going to give up pretty soon. We can get better terms than this if we just say no and hold out. So it really backfires. There's also this belief, this statement that the U.S. only had the 2 atomic bombs. And while that is technically true, it is very misleading. On the island of Tinian, they were assembling more atomic bombs. They would have had more within a week or two. The Manhattan group, they had talked to the U.S. government about using atomic bombs during the invasion of Japan. The plan was for 7. The Manhattan group said, we can get you 14 by November. So while the U.S. didn't have more than 2 functional ready to go at that exact moment when Japan surrendered, they would have had more within a week or so, and a lot more after that. So that statement of the U.S. only had 2, not as accurate as it sounds. It's very misleading. Here's a map showing you what Japan had by 42 at the height of their empire, and when they got it on the other map. Map showing you the U.S.'s island hopping campaign, in case it's been a while since you've seen it. When I teach about this time period in my cultural studies class, one of the things I do is I give my students a list of the important people. Here are the ones that highlighted in yellow that are obviously the most important for what we're talking about. I do want to talk about Japanese people and the fighting, specifically the non-combatants. There were a lot of Japanese people on islands that were not soldiers. We've got non-combatant men, non-combatant women, children, and there were lots of fears and rumors, possibly even truths, about what the Americans would do if they captured you. Keep in mind there was a lot of hatred between the 2 groups, the Japanese and the Americans. And during war, there are always lots of atrocities, especially towards women. So whether these were fears, rumors, propaganda, or truths, we're not really going to focus on that, more of the effect of them. So a lot of these islands have suicide cliffs. This is a sign from the island of Tinian, where I've actually been. I've seen the sign. I lived there for a little while. And this is where a lot of women and children and male non-combatants went. And then a lot of women would even hold their little kids and jump to their deaths rather than fall into American hands because of what they believed would happen. We've got this very small number of Japanese citizens who surrendered. What happened to them when they returned home was not good. If you look at how many soldiers died and do the math, surrender versus death, it's not a very high percentage that surrendered. But if you look at those who died and those who died that were soldiers, if you take the high level of the estimated deaths and you look at them, that's nearly 2 million Japanese people died who were not soldiers and did not die because of the atomic bombs. These are women, children, and kids. So some of these fears, I think, were justified, and some of them were maybe part of the propaganda machine, but that's up to you to decide. All right, I want to talk about the invasion plan for Japan. There's all sorts of different theories on there. Were the atomic bombs necessary? Did they shorten the war? Was it the U.S. getting payback? Was it the theory that's coming out right now is it was an experimental thing to see what would happen? There's all sorts of theories. And I'm not going to try and persuade you one way or the other. What I'm going to do is tell you about the invasion plan. If the atomic bombs had not caused Japan to surrender, this was the invasion plan. Starting with America's side here. America wanted the Japanese to surrender within 12 months of Germany surrendering. The whole idea was kind of a morale. They wanted it to see that the war was going to end, and if it kept dragging out, that's going to cause a lot of problems. They wanted full Allied support. This is going to eventually include the Soviet Unions, although whether they really wanted the Soviets involved, that's an entirely different discussion. The U.S. was planning on non-military combatants, so when the U.S. soldiers got onto the beaches, got into the towns, they were expecting to have to kill civilians. They listed these people as fanatical, hostile population in the invasion documents. The first part, it's a two-part invasion plan, would take place, it was tentatively scheduled for November 1st. Obviously it wasn't needed because of the atomic bombs causing surrender. What they had set aside for this November 1st invasion, 42 aircraft carriers, 24 battleships, 400 destroyers, additional escort ships for the destroyers, 14 divisions of troops. You do the math there, that's at least 140,000 troops minimum going in. When they first made this plan, they didn't know about the atomic bombs. This was kept a huge secret. I think the vice president wasn't even aware of it till after Roosevelt died and he became president. Once they learned about it, they had asked if they could have 7 atomic bombs. They were told that they could have 14, 15 by November. And the original plan was drop a bomb, and then within 2 days later, march the troops in, and then drop a bomb closer, march troops in, drop closer, march troops in. Use the atomic bombs to help them walk to the capital. They didn't understand about radiation, but just think about the devastation 14, 15 atomic bombs would have had. So thankfully that never happened. Part 2 was scheduled tentatively for March 1st. Again, it'd be very tentative because you can't exactly schedule Part 1 down to the minute. They had about 40 divisions of troops planned for this, so much more than what they had for Part 1. As info kept coming in about what the Japanese strengths were, things like that, they kept changing this Part 2. At one point, they had seriously considered using chemical warfare. In fact, they had chemical weapons on Tinian ready to go. The U.S. hadn't signed the Geneva Convention at that point, as far the part about using chemical weapons, and there were some people who believed it was turnabout was fair play since Japan had used it on China. Alright, so let's talk about Japan's preparations. They knew exactly where America was going to land, and so they could plan accordingly. They believed the U.S. had no stomach for a sustained invasion, especially if they made it bloody enough, and then they would be able to get more favorable terms for peace. Men, women, and teens were trained for all sorts of things. There were doctors who trained young men to do different kinds of suicide bombings, run up near a tank with an explosive. Other people were trained for hand-to-hand combat, even with just tools. But really, guys, you can read the rest of this up here. And that's your introduction.